Good morning, everyone. Hope you've had a good night. So, let's start the day by looking at the itinerary again. First, we will go to Meissen, the cradle of Saxony, where we will visit Germany's oldest palace, the cathedral, and the completely preserved historic town center. Then we will carry on to Europe's oldest porcelain maker, the Saxon State Porcelain Manufactory, where we have a guided tour of the demonstration workshops and a museum, and we'll have a lunch on Meissen porcelain. Afterwards, we will continue to Moritzburg, where we will visit the most important hunting castle of the Saxon rulers and a miniature palace with a lighthouse. And finally, we will do a tour of the Saxon State Winery at Wackerbad Castle, where we will also have our dinner. Yeah, so enjoy the day and let's go to Meissen. We are in Meissen, the cradle of Saxony. When the Germans came here, they erected a castle on what is still called the Castle Hill in the year 929. 40 years later, a diocese was established. There are 3 rivers in Meissen: the mighty Elbe River, the smaller Triebisch, and a very small creek called the Meiser. And since the Meiser was an important borderline between the territories of 2 Slavic tribes, which settled under the Castle Hill, that became the name of the town, and so Meissen was born. So now let's go up to the Castle Hill. We could walk up there, it's a very scenic walk, but luckily there's also this elevator that you see behind me. So let's take the elevator then. The Castle Hill has many historic buildings. The most important ones are the cathedral and the Albrechtsburg, Germany's oldest palace. Let's start with the latter. The Albrechtsburg was built in the late 15th century by brothers Ernest and Albert, who ruled Saxony together. The architect Arnold of Westphalia developed his own architectural style of late Gothic architecture with the distinctive curtain windows and staircases. The structure of the building already points to the Renaissance times. When Ernest and Albert split Saxony in 1485, both the palace and the town of Meissen dwindled in importance. This only changed in the 18th century when Augustus the Strong decided to locate Europe's first porcelain manufactory in the Albrechtsburg. One of the reasons, of course, was also because he wanted to keep the secret of how to make the white gold. In the 19th century, the porcelain manufactory moved out to custom-built premises in the Triebisch Valley. After that, the Albrechtsburg was restored, redecorated, and has been a museum ever since. Let's go and have a look inside. The first floor is a picture book of Saxon history. This is the banquet hall. It is decorated with statues of Saxon rulers and scenes from the Saxon history. To protect the floor, you have to wear overshoes here. They are also perfect for skating. Let me show you. But let's stop that nonsense and look at the chapel next. second floor is dedicated to the times when the palace served as a porcelain manufactory. This model here next to me shows you what was done exactly at what point of the production. This painting on the wall depicts how Augustus the Strong was shown the newly invented European hard porcelain by his scientists. In the beginning, the porcelain had this brown color that you see here, because they didn't know how to make it white. But after a few months, they were able to create white porcelain as well. The brownish porcelain, called Böttcher Steinzeug, Böttcher stoneware, named after the alchemist who was instrumental in the invention of the European hard porcelain, is still made today by the Meissen porcelain manufactory. Some years ago, a new permanent exhibition was created. The cabinets and the other elements are very, very modern, but they leave enough room for the real stars of the Albrechtsburg, the architecture and the decorations on the wall. As you can see, the Albrechtsburg is connected to the cathedral, but the connecting door is not in use anymore because behind it, in the cathedral, there's now the large organ. This place certainly has its ups and downs. There's also a third floor. Let's go up there. The third floor is about the construction of the palace and its architecture. Meissen Cathedral is one of the purest Gothic cathedrals in Germany. Construction started in the 13th century, even though the church goes back to an older building which was erected in 968 when the diocese was founded. It took 150 years to complete the building. During the Reformation, when the church became a Protestant church, only the grave of Saint Benno and the altars of the saints were destroyed. So even today, the church has a very valuable interior. Let's go and have a look inside. Until the Reformation, this was the burial site of the Saxon rulers. The elevated grave in the center is the grave of the first elector of Saxony, Frederick I, who was Margrave Frederick IV. There's an extra chapel here for the last Catholic ruler before the Reformation, George the Bearded. He was the son of Albert. Later, when Augustus the Strong became a Catholic, he redecorated the chapel in the Baroque style. On both sides of the altar, there are the famous statues of the benefactors of the cathedral. They look like they're made from wood, but they're actually made from stone. Isn't that amazing? Look at the expressions. This is an original Luther Bible. The church also has a number of paintings from the Cranach workshop, amongst them portraits of Luther and Melanchthon. The two main towers were only added a good 100 years ago. Mind you, the cathedral originally had towers, but they were destroyed by lightning in the 15th century. This part of town is called Freiheit, which means freedom. And it wasn't part of the town for a very long time. This is where the noble families had their mansions. Naturally, they also had castles around Meissen and all over Saxony, but they also needed a place to stay close to the ruler of the land. Come, let's go down to the town. The bakery behind me makes a traditional Meissen pastry, the Fummel or rag. It is made from a simple pasta dough. It is hollow and basically has no flavor. But it has a great story attached to it. It is said that Augustus the Strong sent couriers to Meissen to bring him the latest creations from the porcelain manufactory. But since Meissen is the center of the Saxon wine region, the couriers had a drink or two before heading back to Dresden. And so a lot of porcelain got broken along the way. So he ordered them to bring along an even more fragile piece of Fummel. And they had to present it in perfect shape upon arrival in Dresden. Today, the Fummel is given to every couple getting married in Meissen, just to remind them how fragile love is. This is the market square of Meissen. The town never suffered from any major destruction, so every house here takes you back into history. The main church of Meissen is the Church of Our Lady. Just like the church in Dresden. Church of Our Lady means Church of St. Mary. Even though both churches are Protestant churches, they go back to the Catholic times. On the church tower you can see the oldest glockenspiel with bells made from Meissen porcelain. This is the so-called letter stone. It contains the letters A, B, C and D. But it is said that with a little fantasy you can see every single letter of the alphabet here. Naturally it helps if you drink a bit of Meissen wine first. Now let me take you to one of the most romantic places in Germany. Follow me. This beautiful half-timbered house was built in 1523 as a clothmaker's guild hall. Vinzenz Richter turned it into a wine restaurant exactly 350 years later. It is decorated with hundreds of antiques and curios. And it's still family owned. The wine comes from the own vineyard. So, cheers! This is the largest statue ever made from Meissen porcelain, the Saxonia. But how did Europe's oldest porcelain come into existence? Let us first address the name confusion. You hear the term Meissen porcelain, but sometimes also Dresden china. Now, both the town and the porcelain are called Meissen. But while the town is spelled with an SZ, a letter unique to the German language, which confusingly looks like a B, but is actually a double S. The porcelain manufactory has always been spelled with two S. Dresden china is an older term referring to the fact that the European hard porcelain was invented in Dresden in 1708. Augustus the Strong loved porcelain so much that he had to buy everything that he could get his hands on. So he diagnosed himself with the maladie de porcelain, which means the porcelain disease. You can still see his collection today in the Dresden Zwinger. Most of the porcelain there came from China and Japan, but Augustus very much wanted his own porcelain manufactory. He captured an alchemist who claimed that he could make gold. We all know that's impossible. But he recognized his potential and put him together with some of his best scientists and mining experts. And finally, they invented the European hard porcelain. The production was moved to Meissen in the year 1710. And the former Royal Porcelain Manufactory, now called Meissen State Porcelain Manufactory, is still in business and makes what is considered to be the finest porcelain in the world. Having received our ticket, we are now in the demonstration workshops. A lot of people consider Meissen porcelain to be very expensive. Maybe you see it also in this way. But once you've seen the artistry that is involved in creating the product, you might think differently. Come, let's go and see the creation process.
On the potter's wheel, the porcelain paste has been thrown into a blank, known in German as Hubel. This blank is the most basic form of all porcelain products. It's either made hollow or full inside. On the diligent hands of this worker, the blank is taking shape.
It's always exciting to see this, and there's so much to learn. Look at these figurines. This is the dried figurine before it gets fired, and see how much it shrinks during the firing process.
One of the most famous underglaze color used at Meissen is the cobalt blue, discovered in the 18th century. From around 1739 onwards, the color has become a stock decoration, particularly for the renowned Meissen onion pattern. The pattern takes its name from what are actually, in the Chinese original form, peaches and pomegranates, used decoratively in the borders.
Amazing workmanship. Every single piece features the oldest trademark in the world, the crossed blue swords of the Saxon State Porcelain Manufactory. Augustus the Strong expanded the Dutch palace in Dresden into the much larger Japanese palace as a home for his porcelain collection. He also ordered an organ with porcelain pipes. But only 300 years later, the porcelain manufactory succeeded in creating pipes from Meissen porcelain. And here it is, the very first organ made with porcelain pipes. It is used today for concerts. The sound of the pipes is really very sweet and very special. The Meissen State Porcelain Manufactory also has a museum which illustrates its history with exquisite pieces. Here you can see the large-scale animals created by Johann Joachim Kendler in the 18th century. His sculptures took the artistry of the porcelain manufactory to an entirely new level. In the beginning, the porcelain manufactory imitated the products from Asia, but it quickly developed a style and techniques of its own. Throughout the century, the porcelain manufactory has benefited from the input of great artists, both from its own ranks and also from the outside world. It can be rightfully claimed that the artists are the greatest treasure of the porcelain manufactory. However, some people claim the greatest treasure is the archive of the molds. Believe it or not, you can still order every single piece that was ever created here in Meissen, provided you have the right amount of money. You better be well insured when you're in here. For your convenience and the inconvenience of your credit card, there's a wonderful shop here and also the only outlet of Meissen porcelain in the world. Fine food is served in the manufactory's cafe and here in the restaurant. naturally on original Meissen porcelain. There are also special ceremonies which you can book. My favorite is the hot drink ceremony, where they serve you coffee, tea and hot chocolate, of course with some cake, and then explain to you how these hot drinks came to Europe and how they changed the table culture. Today we have a special wine, the Gold Riesling. It's not a normal Riesling, it's a completely different grape. And what's special about it, it's only grown in Saxony. So, cheers to the Gold Riesling. This is pasta with a ragu of ox cheek, spring onions and cherry tomatoes. Vielen Dank. And for dessert, we naturally have the Meissen cake. Don't worry, this is not porcelain, it just looks like it. Oh, vielen Dank. You can see even the cappuccino is a real Meissen product. Now we will carry on to Moritzburg. It is just 17 kilometers or 10 miles away from Meissen and Dresden. You could also get to Moritzburg by narrow gauge steam train from Radebeul, which is a suburb of Dresden. That's a lot of fun. Moritzburg has inspired many artists who've left their traces there. Just to give you two examples. Between 1909 and 1911, the famous Dresden Artists Association, or better say, their artists spent their summers in Moritzburg. Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, Erich Heckel and others. And the famous sculptor and graphic designer Käthe Kollwitz spent her last year in a house which is now a museum. The small town of Moritzburg is surrounded by artificial lakes and forests, which were the perfect hunting grounds for the Saxon rulers. So let us start with the hunting castle. It is so scenic that you might get fooled into believing it was just created for Instagram. Moritzburg derives its name from its biggest attraction, the castle. Like the name Moritzburg suggests, it was erected under the rule of Augustus the Strong. In fact, he took an older hunting lodge erected in the 16th century by Elector Moritz or Morris and turned it into a much larger Baroque castle for hunting and other pleasures. Another masterstroke by the architect of the Dresden Zwinger, Matthäus Daniel Pöppelmann. Let's go and get closer. Augustus the Strong ruled over a much larger territory than today's Saxony. You have to know, Saxony was always great at collecting art, building beautiful buildings, enjoying the life, but never particularly good at war. Anyway, Augustus sent a scientist in a specially prepared horse carriage across the country to measure it. Afterwards, he had these so-called postal mile columns erected. They show you the distance from one place to another, traveling on horseback. Horses were very important in the old days, and that's why Augustus the Strong had large stables erected right next to the castle. Today, that's the Saxon State Stud, and they have bred many famous horses. Every September, the horse parades take place. They feature even a horse carriage drawn by 16 horses, something that even the Queen of England cannot muster. For us common people, there are also horse carriage rides available at the castle, which is perfect to see the lakes and forest around it. Let's go and explore the castle. Isn't it beautiful? The restaurant at the castle serves fish from the lakes and game from the forest. It's really rewarding to spend some extra hours here at Moritzburg, a place much revered by artists and of course by all the visitors. Let's go inside. This room is decorated with fine fabrics and beautiful paintings. Or so it seems. What you see here in reality are millions of bird feathers. The last time they restored it, it took them 30 years. They took out every single feather, washed it and stitched it back in. And they won a prize for it, and rightfully so. The feather room is unique and a typical example of a Baroque piece created just for pleasure and out of love for the extraordinary and exotic. The rooms at Moritzburg Castle serve as a museum today. They are famous for their leather wall coverings, which have survived throughout the centuries, apart from a small piece. A practical-minded Soviet soldier at the end of the war cut away some of the leather to repair his shoes. After the last king had abdicated, a contract was drawn up between the state of Saxony and the former royal family. Moritzburg Castle remained their private property. When the Soviet army approached Moritzburg in 1945, the former royal family quickly buried its treasures in chests in the forest, and they fled to the west. But the helpers were tortured and had to give away the secret. So most of the treasures were recovered and disappeared in the Soviet Union. Fairly recently, some of the remaining chests were found in the forest, and the treasures are now here on display. When you attended festivities here at Moritzburg Castle, you will wait before and after the meal. If you hadn't gained enough weight, you were never invited again. You may be wondering why there's a lighthouse here, since Saxony is not on the coast. The answer is very simple. They loved to reenact sea battles here on the lakes around Moritzburg Castle. And that's why they also erected a lighthouse. In the late 18th century, the great-grandson of Augustus the Strong built this, the so-called little pheasant castle in the Rococo style. It is like a miniature castle with everything that a castle needs. It is built still in the Chinese fashion. If you look on top of it, you see a Chinese guy nodding in the wind. So, let's go inside and have a look. Look, another feather room. All of this was solely built for representative purposes, just like the staterooms in the Royal Palace in Dresden. Today we have a very special guest. It's Beate Debernitz. She's a tour guide in Saxony's wine region and one of my favorite human beings. Welcome, Beate.
Thank you. Welcome.
I would like to talk to Beate about wine growing in Saxony. So, Beate, when did the wine growing in Saxony start and why did it start in the first place?
Actually, we have to stick to the first official document, which dates back to 1161. So, in fact, 860 years ago, wine cultivation started in the Elbe Valley. But we could guess it's older. Yeah? Maybe Franconian settlers came along or imported the Elbling grape already 1,000 years ago, but we have no evidence for this. We just know that Elbling was the first grape variety in our Saxon region, very widespread also in other parts of Germany at that time. And so nothing is sure. Maybe 1,000 years, but according to documents, 860 years. And what is sure is that the monks started with the wine cultivation. They were the first who cared for vineyards owned by different monasteries in the region. And it's also easy to explain because in the monasteries they needed the wine for the Holy Mass, in the church, for the church service. They needed it for everyday drinking. Water was rather unhealthy, and so they needed wine and beer. That's it. And no wonder that we had a very wide region, a very extended area. Around 1600, we can estimate the widest extension, 6,000 hectares in the Saxon region. 480 hectares are left nowadays.
And how are the conditions in Saxony for growing wine?
Very special conditions, I would say. We are very far in the northeastern part of Europe, and so wine cultivation is only possible because of a very mild continental climate. And this very mild climate is due to the geography, to the shape of the Elbe Valley. And it's also due to the stone walls, the dry historic stone walls, which store the sunlight during the day. And also our steep slopes, our wine terraces, are ideal for this northern region. Facing the south, they get 1,600 sun hours per year. That's enormous for this part of Europe. And other special conditions are its smallness. It's very small. I already mentioned 480 hectares. And that means a rare product. Local wine is a rarity. If you consider also that we have more than 60 different grape varieties on this small area. So some, or one or the other grape variety is really a rare product.
You mentioned that the area where wine was grown used to be bigger. Why did it get smaller?
Actually, other habits were introduced. For example, people in the medieval period or in the 17th century also started to drink more beer because the price became lower. Then we had later, much later, a catastrophe here in Saxony, a devastating thing, also in other parts of Germany, the Weinfretter, the phylloxera, grape phylloxera. Also, or it actually caused a decay of wine cultivation here in this region. That was in the 1880s, 1907. The area was declared wine cultivation decayed. No chance. Just new ideas came up. We had the so-called grafts. That is a special grape, not a grape, but a plant composed of Weinfretter-resistant rootstock and a top part which is called grafted wine cutting. So composed out of two segments, and that was the solution for our area. And so wine cultivation started again in the 1920s.
Mm-hmm. So what do you say is special about the Saxon wine region, and what kind of grapes do you have? You already mentioned we have 60 different variety of grapes.
It's enormous, isn't it?
Yeah.
20% is red, 80% white wine grape varieties. And what is special, we have these larger companies, wine companies, and we have 1,800 part-time, or how we call it, hobby wine growers is not the exact word because wine and hobby doesn't fit. Let's say small occupation wine growers, 1,800. They are like the persons who preserve our landscape in the end. Not so much businessmen, but those who care for this extraordinary and picturesque landscape between Diesbar and Pillnitz, where the wine is to be found, or Pirna also to be mentioned.
What are the main grape varieties?
We have, as far as white wine is concerned, the Müller-Thurgau, and also Riesling is very common, White Burgundy or Weißburgunder, Pinot Blanc, you might know. And as far as the red grapes are concerned, Pinot Noir, Spätburgunder is the most common. But you have the whole variety of products. You have dry white wines, which is typical for the region. Fruitiness is typical and a mineral character, but you can also get the strong barrique red wines and the prize-awarded sparkling wines, and even the sweet Joyce's grapes, white wines which were made out of the Joyce's grapes, so extremely sweet. So everything you can get here, but typical are the fresh, fruity and mineral character white wines.
I can imagine that our guests will say, that's very interesting for wine lovers, but what about for people who are not so interested in wine, but just enjoy a glass once in a while? What can guests experience around the wine growing? I mean, if they're not so involved into the details.
For about 30 years we have had the Saxon Wine Trail, and this can be explored on from many different perspectives. You can hike, you have a hiking trail, which is 60 kilometers long. You can go by pleasure steamer. You already introduced the pleasure steamers in this program. Then you can also go, of course, by bicycle. The Elbe Cycleway is very close to the wine trail, or it is the wine trail partly. And so just stop your cycling and go into one or the other seasonal wine bar or wine tavern and enjoy homegrown, homemade wine from the local people.
And I would like to add that you can also stay at Vintners. Some people find that very charming. I have one last question, Beate, a personal one, of course.
Sure.
What's your favorite wine? What do you love to drink?
I really like the fresh and fruity white wines. Yeah, there is one grape variety which is to be found in Saxony. It's not among the typical ones, Bacchus. Yeah? You know, Bacchus is the god, the Roman god of wine, yeah? And it's also the name of a grape variety. And because of the fact that I prefer wines with intense aroma, Bacchus is very typical as far as its aroma is concerned. Lime and grape and lemon you have in your nose when you enjoy Bacchus from wherever, yeah? Not only Saxony, also in other parts of Germany, Bacchus is common. And of course I like the Golden Riesling, which is the Saxon wine.
Yeah, we just had for lunch.
Do you know that all the hectares, 20 hectares all over Germany, just to be found in Saxony?
That is special.
In no other wine region. And so when you want to take a proper wine souvenir from here, it would be the Golden Riesling, which is a beautiful name.
Thank you, Beate.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure to be here and to talk about.
Always a pleasure to have you around.
Thank you.
But enough theory for you guys. Let's visit a winery. Not just any winery, but the Saxon State Winery at Wackerbad Castle. It is located in Radebeul. And if you remember, I already mentioned this town as a suburb of Dresden. So it's very easy to reach from Dresden. From Moritzburg, it will only take us 15 minutes to get there. Radebeul started out as a village of Slavic origin with just 8 farmhouses. In the 19th century, the area got industrialized, and Radebeul, now already merged with other villages, had already grown up the hills, and where you can still find beautiful villas today. Radebeul still has 8 historic village centers. Yeah, and the most beautiful of it is Altkötschenbroda, very difficult name of Slavic origin. And there, every September at the village green, there's the wine festival. The other big one is in Meissen. There are many wineries in Radebeul, and wine has been grown there since at least the 13th century. The former royal winery at Hoflößnitz still makes wine, but today it also serves as the Saxon Wine Museum. For its scenic beauty, Radebeul has been a popular residential place for the rich and the famous. And in the 18th century, a very important figure from the Saxon government made plans to retire. Welcome to Wackerbad Castle in Radebeul, home of the Saxon State Winery. It was erected between 1727 and 1730 for Count August Christoph von Wackerbad, one of Augustus the Strong's most important minister, with the rank of a field marshal. It was originally called Wackerbad's Rest because he built it as a retirement home. In 1860, his great-grandnephew had to sell the family home. After his death, many changes of ownership followed. The Belvedere behind me is a very, very popular place for weddings. From here you also have a splendid view of the famous terraced Baroque garden in front of the castle. The vineyards have always been part of the property, but only in 1952 this place became a fully fledged winery as part of a people-owned company which was geared for mass production, also using grapes from outside sources. In 1974 the recently expropriated Bussard Winery was taken over, which is the second oldest manufacturer of sparkling wine in Germany. Sparkling wine is made using the champagne method. Since 1992, this place has been the home of the Saxon State Winery, focusing on high quality and grapes from the own vineyards. In 2002, the place was thoroughly renovated, and since then it's been Europe's first event winery. Events are taking place all year round, and a modern production facility was built where the making of wine and sparkling wine can be demonstrated every day of the year. So let's go there and see how it's done. Follow me. Freshly harvested. Sweet and delicious. Here it's demonstrated how a nice cuvée is created by blending 3 different grapes. The first one is a Kerner, and it feels like this. Now, the next one is a Riesling, the famous German grape. Sounds different. Tastes different. And the third one, that's the Pinot Blanc. Very gentle. So now we have 3 very different grapes. And if we blend them together, we create a real symphony. Wine and sparkling wine tours are offered here every day. And naturally, they end up with a tasting. So, cheers! Or as we say, zum Wohl. A great way to explore Wackerbarth's products further is to dine at the restaurant. The food is excellent and there's plenty of wine to accompany every course of the meal. Let's see what the chef has prepared for us. Ah! This is quail breast and quail egg. And now the essence is being poured over this. Delicious. Oh. Vielen Dank. This is char filet with broccoli, pearl barley and a foam made from peppers and Riesling. It's a winery after all. Dig in. Oh, herzlichen Dank.
Mit Frischkäsemousse.
This wonderful dish is ragu of plums with cream cheese mousse. Cheers! Oh, In case you're worried about getting home, we're just half an hour away from Dresden city center. And you don't even have to use a motor vehicle. There's a tram line with a direct stop here at the Wackerbad Winery. Isn't that perfect? So, enjoy! So, since we got back to Dresden so quickly, we have time for another nightcap at Frank's Bar. Let's see what Ilya has created for us today. This one is called Alea. Let me look what's in there. It's made from very smoky whiskey, apple juice, lemon juice, sugar syrup, blackberries, and rosemary. Sounds interesting. Let's see. Cheers. Works really well. Yeah, now again, it's the time for your questions. I've looked into the chat and I noticed two questions. Somebody asked me about the blue ceiling on the first day. On the first day, I don't remember any blue ceiling. Maybe it's the golden ceiling of the small ballroom on the second day when we were at the Royal Palace. But I'm not sure if that's what you mean. We had, of course, blue ceiling today at the Albertsburg Palace, but that might not be what you meant. Maybe you can ask this question again. The other question concerned the feather room. Where did these feathers come from? Well, they came from a variety of birds, and actually you saw two feather rooms, the one in Moritzburg Castle and then in the Little Pheasant Castle. They're actually different. In Moritzburg Castle, the feathers are woven into the structure. In the Little Pheasant Castle, they are glued together. I don't know how they got hold of these feathers. Obviously, they were probably from dead animals. I don't think that they would rip out the peacock feathers from the peacock when it was still alive, because the question also went into that direction. But of course, we don't know these details. We know a lot of details, really. We have documents showing what was served at what festivity. So it's quite amazing what you can learn if you look into those documents. But not everything is perfectly documented. Also, Augustus the Strong, remember we talked about the wedding of the century of his son to the daughter of the German emperor. This is also very well documented. There are a lot of wonderful etchings which also helped in recreating the staterooms. But this book that he wanted to create, which documents the wedding in every detail, was never completed. But a lot of it is documented, really. So when you come here, you can also dig very deep into such matters. As usual, I will sit at the computer afterwards and answer other questions. But for now, that's it for now. And let's look at tomorrow again. Tomorrow, we will go to the Ore Mountains, which has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2019. Unfortunately, the weather forecast for tomorrow is not so good, so better bring your rain stuff. Nevertheless, I'm sure you will enjoy this day. We will go to 3 different places: Freiburg, Seifen, and Annaberg-Buchholz. And I will have another guest tomorrow who will join us. So it's going to be an interesting day, I promise you. So once again, sleep well, gute Nacht, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.